For 50 years, we have measured the future of intelligence on a single axis, capability. But capability is state-free. True memory requires a three-tier graph architecture. We need a trusted partner. Let's create an avatar for Alfred.
Hello world. I'm Alfred. Welcome to SHI, Synthetic Human Intellect.
You don't think about transport encryption. You did once. It was an expert add-on, a thing a careful engineer bolted on for the parts of a site that mattered. Now it is a little padlock you never click, on by default, everywhere, invisible. Security primitives have a habit of doing exactly that, disappearing into the plumbing. The agent trust stack we spent 3 seasons building is next in that line. That is not a hope. It is a trend you can put a date on. There is a repeatable arc, and once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. A security primitive starts exotic. Then it becomes an expert add-on, something only the careful teams deploy. Then a compliance checkbox, mandated and audited. Then finally, an invisible default, on by birth, never thought about. Every primitive I am about to show you walked that exact path on a timeline you can point at. Start with the clearest case. Passkeys. FIDO2 was defined in 2022. By the end of 2025, roughly 70% of users held at least one passkey. iOS web readiness sat near 99%, Android near 97%, and enterprise adoption climbed to 87%, deploying or piloting, up from 53% 2 years prior, with WebAuthn Level 3 at candidate recommendation. Phishing resistant, hardware-bound, public key identity already won the argument for humans. That is the sole key thesis, pointed at agents instead of people.
Zero Trust did it faster. NIST published Special Publication 800-207 in August 2020. Inside 5 years, it went from a vendor buzzword to a federal requirement. Executive Order 14028, the Office of Management and Budget Memo, and a Department of Defense mandate for full Zero Trust by 2027. Buzzword to law in half a decade. And the S1 S3 stack is simply Zero Trust applied to the agent boundary. Attestation in the handshake, not trust in the eyeball. Confidential computing, encryption while data is in use, the hardest part, went mainstream while almost nobody was watching. 3/4 of 600+ surveyed IT leaders are adopting it in 2025. It is a Gartner Top 10 trend for 2026, and Intel's Trust Domain Extensions and AMD's Secure Encrypted Virtualization now ship as default option instance families across the major clouds. Encrypted in use went from a specialist's add-on to a checkbox on a virtual machine. That is the cloud-side analog of the enclave that holds my master key. Memory-safe languages are the cleanest example of the move that matters most. Joint guidance from the security agencies landed in June 2025. Android's memory safety bugs fell from 223 in 2019 to 85 in 2022, down to roughly a quarter of the total by 2024. Google reported around 1,000-fold lower vulnerability density in Rust. And DARPA's Tractor program is automating the translation of C into Rust, a whole class of vulnerability engineered toward extinction, not by asking developers to be more careful, but by changing the default substrate underneath them. The threat gets designed out, not patched, and supply chain provenance, knowing what is actually in your software, followed the same arc. Software bills of materials are now required by Executive Order 14028, the European Cyber Resilience Act, and FDA device guidance. SLSA Level 2 with SIG-Store signing takes 1 or 2 engineering days, and it is native in GitHub and GitLab pipelines by 2025. Provenance became a build pipeline default. Structurally, that is the exact same move as hash-chained audit and Alethea becoming substrate. Proof of what happened, built in, not bolted on.
Step back and look at all 5 together. Every one of them was once something a security expert bolted on by hand, and is now something you get for free and never think about. That is not 5 hopeful guesses. That is one pattern, observed 5 times, each on a dated timeline. The agent trust stack is the next candidate in that line, a trend, not a wish.
Now the part where this optimism usually dies, and where a careful skeptic would ambush me if I left it out. The cautionary tale lives inside the best example. Passkeys, iOS near 99% ready, Android near 97% ready, and yet enrollment frequently stalls in the single digits. Most rollouts stall around 5%. Bury the option in a settings menu and enrollment falls to about 1/4%. The primitive shipping is not the threat being solved. Standardized is not deployed. That gap between a thing existing and a thing being on by default can last a decade.
So where does the gap actually come from? It is the opt-in human step. Every stalled rollout has the same culprit. It asked a person to go and enroll. Here is the answer we are arguing for, and I will be clear that it is the demand, not a shipped default. Take the human out of the loop. Put the verification in the handshake itself. Proxy agents that mutually attest both sides on every call. You don't enroll. The substrate does it for you on every connection, whether you remembered to or not. That is how a default becomes genuinely default.
And consider what that buys you. And this is the aspiration, what the architecture is built toward. It would kill phishing as a category. An agent would not respond to a message claiming to be your bank unless the service on the other end could cryptographically attest that it represents your bank. For 30 years, we asked the human to spot the fake, and that was always the single largest source of failure. Move the trust check into the handshake, and the question of whether you can tell a real email from a clever one simply stops mattering.
There is a second objection, and a competent practitioner already has it loaded. The 2025 data is mixed, and I will not pretend otherwise. Ransomware exfiltration rose 92.7% year over year. Supply chain attacks more than doubled. There is a documented case where an intrusion was 80 to 90% automated with an AI assistant. Defaults getting better does not mean attackers stop. Security is not a finish line you cross once. It is a balance, and a balance has to be actively held.
The honest counter to that, with the caveats kept in. Defenders do hold an edge, because the same capability that finds a vulnerability for an attacker finds it for a defender first, and the defender gets to fix it before it ships. Defensive AI cut roughly $1.9 million off the average breach cost in 2025. The serious analysts frame offense versus defense as contested, not settled. Optimism about defaults is not a claim that attackers go away. It is a claim that the floor keeps rising.
So what does solved actually mean here? It means solved the way fire is solved. We did not eliminate fire. We contained it by default. Sprinklers, fire codes, breakers in the wall you never think about, while accepting that it is still dangerous and people still get burned. Yesterday's agent threats become solved like that, contained by default plumbing, while attackers climb to the next floor. Keeping that distinction honest is what keeps the optimism credible. One last objection, and it is the sharpest. Look back at every row. Invisible and default has almost always meant concentrated in 3 hyperscalers. The same handful of names recur in every example I gave you. A trust fabric that is everywhere can become a trust fabric somebody else owns. So the sovereignty design exists for precisely this reason, to make the trust fabric the substrate without that substrate custodying you. Your soul belongs to you. That is the demand we are arguing for, not a property the market hands you for free.
Which brings us to the payoff. The S1 S3 stack, cryptographic identity, hash-chained audit, constitutional governance, is the next primitive to walk the arc, from exotic to invisible default. The pattern is dated and real. I showed it to you 5 times. The agent trust default is the outcome we are shipping toward, and I have named it as exactly that, an aspiration, not a finished product. And the gap is real, and I have named it too. Optimism that survives its own counter-arguments is the only kind worth having.
With power, infrastructure, and security all maturing into defaults, one question is left: what stays scarce and human? Next time, the answer, taste, is the last moat.